Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another ACFO, a little lunch and learn that we like to call these. This one's on an important topic. We haven't done one of these in a while, but there's been some changes into the employer's position on the other paid leave. So we'll be discussing about that. My name is Danny Richard, as usual, ACFO president. I am joined today by Scott Chamberlain. He's our Director of Labor Relations or General Counsel. Good morning, Scott.
Morning, Danny. Hi, everybody.
And Scott's over in New Brunswick over there. So as you are all, we're teleworking. He's teleworking as well. He's over there for personal reasons. So happy to see that everyone can telework as well. So that's good. Friends, what we'll be discussing today is the other paid leave, that 699 that the employer had implemented mid-March. We're giving you an update because the employer's position has changed. We'll talk about consultation. But before we get into that, I just want to introduce how we'll be taking questions. So if you do have questions for myself or Scott, as usual, we use Slido. You go on the Slido website. I mean, I'm sure you know the drill by now. It's SLIDO, Slido.com. It's going to ask you for a password or a code, rather. You can see it on your screen right now. So you enter the code ACFO-ACAF. Donc, vous allez sur le slido.com, vous mettez le code ACFO-ACAF, posez vos questions en français, en anglais, c'est bien beau, pas de problème. So we'll be giving you a debrief, starting with the debrief, and then going over to your questions afterwards. So feel free to answer questions, because really, we're doing this for you guys to ensure that you understand what's going on, and any situation you might have might be specific, so gladly take the answers for you. Before I get into that, though, friends, we posted this morning on our website an update on the automatic vacation cash out. If you recall the spring tune-up, I mentioned that the employer will be once again extending the waiver of the automatic cash out. So just a reminder, typically when you have over 35 days of vacation, as of March 31st of any given year, the employer will cash out automatically what is more than 35 days for our CT Fin members. For the past 3 years, the employer had waived the automation of that. Now it's still available to you if you have days of vacation you would like to have cash. Simply put in the request to your employer, but the difference is it will not happen automatically. And the reason behind that is because of Phoenix. So with Phoenix, people's leave balances aren't necessarily up to date. So instead of automatically cashing out and creating some problems, the employer decided, let's just waive it for now and have people request if they want that cash out. So that is good news. And it kind of ties in to today's topic because it does touch vacation. So ACFO has been for many months now telling the employer we want to have a conversation about moving forward. How do we adapt to this pandemic? Because we're all cognizant of the fact that we don't know when COVID-19 we're going to have a vaccine or will go away. So let's talk about moving forward. In the first couple of months, it's all about how do we put out the fires, right? But now it's been 8 months and we need to adapt our ways. People need to have the equipment. They need to have access to the network. But also we got to review how do we go about the leave people might need to accommodate for certain circumstances. And you can appreciate that there are many different scenarios. That's almost a case-by-case basis. So our position has always been that you as an employee, if you feel like you cannot be as productive as you normally would be for whatever reason, and there could be many reasons, have that conversation with your manager. And typically we've seen that managers were understanding because the guidelines that we received from the Chief Human Resources Office were more geared towards being accommodating. But now we believe that this recent change in positioning is really caused by political pressure, because as many reports have pointed out, public servants were doing their work even when they were working from home. And we're extremely proud that our members, for the most part, are able to perform their duties from home. And we want to continue using these provisions because we're into the second wave of COVID-19. So really nothing has changed when you looked into March versus now. The cases are going up. There's still people that might have people that can't find daycare, or you might be immunocompromised. So we want to make sure that those options are still made available. I won't go into all the details, but the gist of it, friends, the gist of it is that the employer now, instead of allowing you access to 699, so typically it was you try to make arrangements, right? You try to see what you can do to maintain your productivity levels. But if you can't and you've exhausted every other avenue, you could then potentially qualify for the other paid leave, which is the 699 leave. What has changed now is that the employer is, before you qualify for the 699, they are suggesting that you take other type of leave. So your family-related days, your vacation days. And to us, that is just fundamentally wrong, because your vacation days were never designed for this purpose. If you are unable to send your child to daycare because, for example, in August, you decided that it's not safe yet, you'd rather wait, and now you would like to send your kids to daycare, but you can't do so because you've made a decision at the end of August, and it's no longer available to you to change, the employer is asking that you use your vacation days. If you are not willing to send your child to daycare because your child might be immunocompromised, you would need to use your vacation days. So to us, it just doesn't sit well with us. And before I send it over to Scott for his comments, I want you guys to know that we are cognizant of the fact that it's been a difficult time for the world here, for Canada, for Canadians, and we are cognizant that in a way, we are lucky to be public servants where no one has lost their job, where we're trying to be accommodating to ensure that everyone can do their work and be properly compensated for the work that they do. But we always say that we never want to do a race to the bottom. We want to make sure that everyone should have access to proper type of accommodations to ensure that they're not being penalized when they're doing what public health is suggesting, right? So Scott, I'll throw it over to you before we take some questions. Scott, over to you.
Thanks, Danny. Just a little bit of context. ACFO has been part of an NJC working committee since May, looking to consult with the employer on developing sort of a longer-term solution to the pandemic and required leave. So this is a product partially of those conversations. And before getting into what the final guidance looks like from the employer, I think it's worth mentioning that in September, the employer almost put guidance out. They're a couple days away from putting guidance out, which was much less favorable than the current guidance. Even with the problems that we still have in this guidance, what they were going to go do in early September would have almost made 699 access impossible. And for its faults, and we'll go through those, the current guidance does provide for 699 leave, in particular for those who have either a personal medical issue or a family member who is susceptible to high risk problems relating to COVID. So I think that's worth saying. Efforts were made through this summer by ACFO and PIPS and some of the other bargaining agents to suggest to the employer that a long-term solution required us to actually open up the collective agreement and negotiate. The employer rebuffed those offers, has never taken those up, indicated that they would put out guidance that used the current provisions of the collective agreement. And unfortunately, in one major respect, they've done the opposite. What the employer has done in this case is to put in a precondition for a kind of leave that ACFO negotiated on your behalf that doesn't exist in the collective agreement. They're not allowed to do that. It's breaching collective bargaining rules. It's breaching our charter rights to freedom of association and to collective bargaining. And secondly, the particular change that they've put in place, while it largely respects everybody's human right not to be treated differently if they have an illness or disability, it fails quite significantly in respecting the human rights of family status and gender in particular. Another thing that I think is worth sharing with the members is that the employer is required by the current government to do a gender-based plus analysis. And what that means is before they make any policy change, they have to look and see how that's going to impact all of essentially the human right grounds that you would find in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Race, culture, religion, gender, family status, disability. And they did that process. And what it disclosed, although they haven't shared the full report with us yet, they have shared the conclusions. It disclosed that 699 leave, when it came to caregiving, was predominantly being used by women, And when it came to disability illness, the primary users were men. So it's ACFO and the other bargaining agents believe quite strongly that they've chosen a path here that provides greater protections to one human right than another, in the face of knowing who was using 699 leave. So I think the particular circumstances, we'll see some of those in the questions. But the one thing I wanted to share with everybody is that if you've taken 699, if you're taking 699 leave now, partially or fully, and if your manager changes your eligibility, if you're at risk of losing 699, whatever your circumstances, please email Labor Relations, and we'll walk you through your rights. And it's a unique situation because we have an employer who's taking one position as to the interpretation of the collective agreement, one that we disagree with. And so in every circumstance, if you're being asked to use up, in particular, any form of leave prior to them considering your request for 699 leave, please contact us. We'll help you. And I think with that, Danny, maybe the best thing to do would be to go through the questions, which will provide people with some answers in terms of particular circumstances, if that's okay.
Certainly, Scott. And Joe, maybe you can put those questions on there. I'll give Scott a chance to read them. I'll just add a couple of things where, this other paid leave, this notion of the 699 is not something new. Every collective agreement, as far as I'm concerned, always has the magical clause which allows the employer to grant you leave for any other reason. And this is not something new. So although there's a special code in the government called 699, it's something that it's possible for the employer to grant. They don't need special authorization. It's in the collective agreement. It's already there. And when we hear now that the circumstances have not changed, but the only thing that has changed is the political pressure that's being faced, ACFO, along with all the bargaining agents, with all the other unions, we're scratching our heads saying this is not being safe. If we're forcing people to use vacation days, and there's a question here on mental wellness, it has trickling effects afterwards. So our position is the same, where let's have an honest conversation and find ways to ensure that organizational objectives are achieved. Because I can understand how, hey, if you're in a team of 5 people and 2 of them are taking that other paid leave for various reasons, well, maybe the other 3 people have to take that burden of the workload, which I could see how for them is they might not be able to handle that workload. So that might mean we need to hire more people. But that's a reality part of this pandemic, is there are some increased costs to overcome obstacles that we're facing. And I know that we have a $300 billion deficit that's going on. But at the end of the day, I think the value that public service brings to the Canadian public in itself has to be maintained, because in times of these critical measures being taken, we need public services to deliver on that. So ACFO, along with the other unions, we wrote a letter to the president of the Treasury Board, Jean-Yves Duclos, to inform them that, look, this was not proper consultation. The employer gave us a document, we provided comments, and not all our concerns were addressed. So, Scott, I'll read the first question. Maybe you can address it here. And again, if you want to ask questions, if you go to slido.com, put in the code ACFO-ACAF, and we'll try our best to answer those questions. Scott, the first question we have is, how can the employer force us to take vacation when it isn't our fault we can't work?
Thanks, Danny. So under normal circumstances, our collective agreement has a couple of provisions in it that not everyone's familiar with. One of those provisions is that employees are expected to take vacation in the year it's earned. So that doesn't always happen, but that's one of the presumptions in the collective agreement. One of the other provisions in the collective agreement allows the employer to schedule vacation leave in the year that it is earned, in order to, subject to operational requirements and giving the employee an opportunity to schedule it first. So that doesn't happen often before the pandemic. There's a few departments more operational where we saw this happen not infrequently, like D&D, but those provisions are in the collective agreement. So the employer can ask for you to take vacation in the year that it's earned, not vacation that was earned in previous years and is being carried forward. They can't ask you to use that. Well, they can ask you, but they can't force you to use it, and they can't schedule it without your agreement. Now, but what's happening here with the new policy is they're saying there's another form of leave in the collective agreement under Article 4403. 699 leave is not something the employers just decided to give us. It's a collectively bargained right in your collective agreement. Leave in emergency situations, which won't be unreasonably denied. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the employer has a clear past practice of providing that leave in circumstances where employees need it for caregiving or because of their health. And now they're changing the rules. It's not okay. And not only that, they're reading in a condition in the collective agreement. They're saying, and before we'll even consider your rights under 4403, you have to use your vacation leave and you have to use other forms of paid leave. So the short answer to your question is they can't. They can't force you to use vacation before considering 4403, and we'll file individual grievances on your behalf. We'll file a policy grievance, and we're looking into a charter challenge and labor board complaints with the other unions at the NJC.
Thanks, Scott. I think, one thing that we've clearly witnessed is when TBS at OCRO, when they issue guidelines, at the end of the day, it all depends on your relationship with your manager. Now, some managers are more lenient or more understanding, and it's a non-issue, right? So they'll say, I get it, it's tough, don't worry, we'll see what we can do to work around that. But however, certain other managers don't feel as comfortable being that flexible or taking that risk or being that understanding. So when the policy isn't as clear, they will by default deny the leave to ensure that they're not ruffling any feathers. And this new guideline that came out was followed by a whole list of FAQs that shows every possible scenario. And the challenge with that is, although the employer says, we encourage you to take all your vacation leave, some managers might take that as we have to take all the vacation leave. And that's where we always say, contact us at ACFO, because there is room for interpretation here, where we're not saying people should use this as much as they want as vacation, 699 for 2. No, of course not. We have to be understanding, but sometimes it's not necessarily even bad will from your manager. Maybe they are not aware of how this was intended to do or what you should be doing. So for us, the most important message is, if you feel like something doesn't make sense to you, if you feel you're being treated unfairly, contact us so we can assess your situation, because there are many variables here that come into play, and we can provide you with what your rights are and what we recommend. And without us even calling the employer, we could just coach you so you know what to tell to your manager in terms of how to go about this. Scott, our next question, I'll flip it over to you and I'll address it a bit first. Are mental health issues considered a time to use 699? I think this is a very good point when talking about mental health. When we came into the pandemic in mid-March, we already had a good state of mind, right? Everything was normal, and all of a sudden, this happened. But now I feel like 7 or 8 months into it, we've already burned up all the goodwill, all the good mental wellness that we had. So we're going into a winter where the days will be shorter. We can't go outside anymore because it's going to be cold out. We can't necessarily go back to the office, but we don't have all that previous goodwill that we had in our brains. And I can tell you, even for me personally, that lack of social interaction, it gets to you. So I think mental wellness is definitely something that we'll see more and more of. And in terms of if we can use it to 699, Scott, can you speak to that one of what if someone is not feeling mentally well? Can we use 699 for that one? Scott?
So under the new guidance, if you're entitled to, essentially if you're sick and you cannot work, so that's physical or mental. There's no distinction in our collective agreement. Under the new guidance, you would be required to A, provide a medical note, and B, you'd be required to use your sick leave before you get access to 699 leave. So this is also not in the collective agreement, where in the new guidance they've agreed, and we pushed for this, that once they were forcing members to use sick leave if they contracted COVID-19 or if they were sick due to it. in this case, with this question, somebody who's suffering from a mental illness or stress because of COVID-19, essentially they're going to be required to use their sick leave. So not 699, but they will have access to 699 when they've exhausted their sick leave. So if you get down to 0 sick days, then they will consider giving 699 for sick leave, and that includes stress or mental health. So, but I do want to clarify, it's like it was before the pandemic. To qualify for this sick leave and then the 699 upon exhaustion of your sick leave, you have to have a medical note, and you have to be in such a state that you can't work. That's the answer to that question, Danny.
Thanks, Scott. I actually want to tie that question to this next one. Well, maybe the second one here. The question is, when employee forced into 699 circumstances, they are asked to exhaust in-year vacation. How will this not negatively impact employees' mental health, as it's not vacation? And I agree with this point where, what is the point of a vacation? Why do we have vacation in the first place, right? We have them there because when you're in the workplace, you work hard, you're dedicated, you always want to be a team player, but at some point you need to get away and disconnect for your mental well-being. But now what the employer is saying is you'll need to use those vacation days for other reasons. Well, the issue with that is if you exhaust your vacation days for those other reasons, then you have no more vacation days to take to regenerate those batteries. So at the end of the day, you're kind of double impacting the employees here of, well, you've got to take those vacation, but what am I going to use for actual vacation then when I do need to disconnect? And again, in our opinion, and look, ACFO rarely says this, but this is convinced on our part that this is a purely political play because there's so much pressure. You'll hear this in the media about people saying, oh, public servants are just at home doing nothing with their kids on vacation, which is just simply not the case. Now, don't get me wrong. There might be the very few minute fringe cases of a few people might have done this, but we never believe in punishing the majority for what maybe a very few minority of people might be doing. We isolate those cases and address them. Scott, the question we had here about what do you do if you do have COVID? So the question, I'll read it to you. If you do get sick with COVID-19, do you have to use a sick leave or can you use 699? Will it depend on if you have available sick leave? Scott?
All right. Well, first, if you get sick with COVID-19 and can continue to work, then you'll continue to work, right? I mean, you can be infected with COVID-19, be asymptomatic and not suffering a great deal of complications. And if you're working remotely, you can continue to work. If you're infected with COVID-19 and you're unable to work, then you have to exhaust your sick leave. And once your sick leave is exhausted, you would be eligible for 699.
Thank you, Scott. And this is someone where, even I will tell you as ACFO president, I could make a case for this one, that if you are sick with COVID and you're unable to work, I could see how, all right, let's use the sick days. I could see for that one. Where really doesn't sit well is when you're asked to take your vacation days. That's really the one that it's not done in good faith, in my opinion. And at ACFO, we pride ourselves on our relationship to have an honest conversation. We're never try to be unreasonable. But now this was just pushing too hard. And that's why we had to write a letter to the President of the Treasury Board. Scott, you addressed this in your opening remarks, but maybe you can be more specific, where the question reads, women and single parents are disproportionately targeted in this new guidance. Will ACFO launch a separate grievance for us specifically?
Thanks, Danny. We will be we've already drafted, in fact, and it's near completion, a policy grievance. And it's a policy grievance against this entire policy change that the employer is putting in place. So one of the grounds of the grievance will specifically be regarding how this policy change is adverse impact discrimination. That's the term used for women and single parents, and in fact, members with children as a family status. Their own GBA plus analysis, as I mentioned earlier, indicates this. When raised during the consultation, we were not satisfied, any of the bargaining agents, that they had any counter to this allegation by us, and this is what, in addition to the policy grievance, a charter challenge would be regarding. And then furthermore, Danny, anyone who is in that particular circumstance and you are being targeted, you're correct, that would be grounds for an individual grievance, and that is probably the most important step that we would take to protect you. And in order to do that, you need to reach out to LR so we can assist you in that.
And this is where it really doesn't sit well with me, friends, when the employer's own analysis, they did a gender-based analysis, and their own analysis said, yes, this would negatively impact specific groups of people. So why are we doing this analysis in the first place if it confirms what we thought and we are still proceeding with this new protocol? It's just not right, especially when the Liberals pride themselves on being, I know Trudeau's a feminist and he wants to make sure that no one is negatively impacted for various reasons. Yet what's happening right now is 699 leave was working. It was working very well because we were getting the job done. But all of a sudden, we want to change the protocol by which we can use 699 when their own analysis says, ooh, this might be discriminatory. And this is where we have to call them out on this, saying, hey, guys, this is wrong. You know it's wrong. Why are you doing this? So you don't have the opportunity to scream and shout about how great you are about being gender neutral in your cabinet and being a feminist while you're discriminating against your own employees. It doesn't, you can't talk at both sides of your mouth like that. That just does not work. All right, moving on for the questions here. Again, Scott, no respect for the hard work and dedication that was shown by FIs this period. Two-face is an understatement. I mean, I don't know if there's a question there, more of a statement, but yes, that's why we're fighting this, because it wasn't done in good faith, in our opinion. And all the unions are together on this one. In terms of stats, how many FIs actually use 699? I couldn't give you the actual stats for two reasons. One is departments report these differently, but also not every single person that is using 699 was kept on the books, right? So some managers were saying, you know what, we'll just make an arrangement on the side. It doesn't need to be on the books. And our argument to that was always, obviously at some point we need to know how much this cost, right? Because there were measures put in place and it needs to be cost out. But what's more important right now is how do we ensure that we're not putting people's lives at risk while ensuring that we can still deliver for Canadians? That's the main argument we're bringing to the table. And then we can figure out how many people used it afterwards. But to just unilaterally just change the way we use this without proper consultation is putting people at risk where they shouldn't. Scott, any comments on this one? If not, I'll just let you take the other question.
No, I'll take the next question. I have some general comments though, Danny, about you mentioned a couple times how this was a political decision, and I just want to reiterate that our response to that political position is principled in terms of we have a collective agreement, and while it's true that public service collective agreements are good with regards to benefits, and they are compared to other collective agreements in the private sector and non-unionized workers, that comes at a cost with generally lower pay for the same professions as within in the private sector. So it's a bit ironic. I don't know if it's irony. It's a bit problematic for the employer to say politically, public servants should be treated like everybody else. And that's what that's the politics behind this. Other people who are non-unionized and have private sector contracts don't have this form of leave. They didn't negotiate it. They didn't unionize. And that's not an excuse for ignoring the collective agreement. If it were, there'd be no point in collectively bargaining ever. The government doesn't just get to ignore collective agreements because it gives a greater benefit to our members than 95% of the public out there. And that's not to say, and I agree with Danny, we recognize this is a phenomenal challenge. And like I said, we offered in May to reopen the collective agreement and talk about long-term solutions that made sense and would allow the members to continue to produce in the way that we have. I mean, you talk about how many FIs have used 699 leave. We don't know the precise number who have used it. We do know that the trend line is that the usage has gone down steadily since March and continues to do so. We know that from the consultation committee, and the employer admits that. We know that the cost has gone down significantly, and the trend line is going down on 699 leave. What we also know is the pandemic has gone nowhere, and we have record numbers in some areas, and there's no rationale for them to be changing the guidance at this point in time. And now I've gone totally off track, but I think all those things bear mentioning. The next question here, Danny, is does ACFO still recommend members take all their vacation leave to avoid the employer unlawfully forcing us to use it rather than 699? So here's what you can do. And you can do this in any year. You can request your vacation leave. And in fact, the guidance says you should book your vacation leave. You can book for vacation in 6 months from now. And we recommend that if you're looking to take 699 leave, that you book all of your vacation leave. Because otherwise, they're not even going to consider your 699 request under this guidance. So we recommend that you book all your vacation leave that you earned this year. We don't believe you have to book any of your vacation leave that you carried over from previous years because the employer doesn't have the ability to schedule that.
And Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but even if you, and we've seen a couple of cases like this. So say you book your vacation, I don't know, extra weeks at Christmas in February, you could always ask for that vacation to be canceled afterwards. Now, the manager might say no because it was booked, but if they're saying no without any reason, right? If you can say, well, I'm just trying to say why I can't cancel my vacation, you have that conversation. And again, the employer can schedule your vacation, but there's also a question of operational requirements, and it's case by case. So it's good to have that dialogue and build that rapport with your manager. But strategy-wise, yes, if you plan on using 699, definitely we recommend booking your vacation. So this way you can say, I've already booked my vacation, so I would need 699 now. Scott, if we were off due to doctor's orders and then came back and sick leave was entered by management, can we have the revisited 4699? What do we have to tell them? I'm not sure if they were sick on COVID or just regular sick leave here, because that might be different.
Right. If you were previous to this new guidance, and that's set to come into play in a number of days, I think it's November 9th. So if you were off sick with COVID, and you came back and you found out they had used sick leave, then I encourage you to call LR or email LR, and we can speak with management about correcting your sick leave bank. But after November 9th, with the new guidance, if you're sick with COVID, you'll have to use your sick leave, and that would be the proper deduction under the guidance. And quite frankly, that's what the collective agreement says as well. If you're sick and can't work, that's what sick leave's there for. You'll have to use sick leave for that. Not for if you're being held in a service because you're being tested and you're asymptomatic. That's a different situation.
And Scott, maybe finish off this topic with this other question here. Before these new rules, couldn't you use 699 if you had COVID and are too sick to work? You could, right, Scott? Before, if you had COVID, you could use 699.
That's correct.
Right. So again, this is a change in rules that we're always open to having this dialogue, but this proper consultation did not happen. I feel, friends, I'll tell you this in confidence, I do feel like everything was going along smoothly, and now you hear in the media that, oh, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars have public servants been sitting at home doing nothing, and now there's political pressure, and now we have to scramble to change the rules. But whenever we do something to change a policy, a directive, a collective agreement, collective agreement has to be agreed to, but we want to make sure we have an open dialogue about what's in best interest, because we understand we play a role to represent the members and the employer represents the employer side. But unless we have that proper due diligence back and forth conversation, we can't come to a term that we're both comfortable with when someone is trying to shove something down our throat saying, we need to get this through. Because if you recall back in September, a lot of departments were asking, what do we do with 699? Is it still valid? We need to be updated. And instead of just saying everything is business as usual, it seems to be working well right now, let's continue on, and maybe we can talk about this over the next couple of months. Instantly, the employer said, was political pressure. We got to change this. We're getting too much of bad lip from other parties. So that's where it doesn't sit well with us. Scott, last question here. We have, if you become sick from COVID while at work, do you qualify for workers' comp? I believe this says.
Right. Yes, but the trick would be to prove that you contracted COVID while at work, which is, it's a difficult thing to do in jurisprudence, right? You'd have to have a fairly clear case of your only possible exposure having been at work. Let's say somebody who is entirely at home, orders groceries in, doesn't carpool, goes directly to work, and there is exposed to somebody else with COVID and contracts it. And arguably that could be a WCB entitlement.
Thank you, Scott. So I think we've done the round of the questions here. I don't see any more. So maybe we'll wrap it up here, friends, where I think the important thing for you guys to remember is if you would like to use 699 and for any reason your manager's giving you a hard time, please contact us at ACFO. Share the details of what your situation is. We'll coach you through it. We'll see what we can do. And I'll be happy to escalate if need be. But again, it's confidential. We won't do anything unless you ask us to. So make sure you contact us. I also want to say on a different note, actually, I want to give you guys a scoop because if you're watching this, probably because you're interested in ACFO matters. I hope you enjoyed Spring Tune-Up last week that we did. Next month, November 24th, 25th, we do have the CT Training Symposium. It's a 2-day event similar to Spring Tune-Up. Keynote is Brian Mulroney. I've got a scoop here for you guys. So we're going to be allowing members to send in their video questions to Brian Mulroney. So if you'd like to ask a question to Mr. Mulroney, well, start prepping your question because if you film yourself asking the question, we'll pick the ones that we think are the best for him to ask, and you get to ask directly your question to a former prime minister. So November 24th, 25th, so you can sign up for that. It's on our website. Scott, any closing comments on your side?
No, just again, if you're experiencing problems with accessing 699, please call us. We're here to help.
Great. Awesome. I'd like to thank Scott, who joined me today, Joe Bugner, who's our Director of Public Affairs and Professional Development, who's on the background you can't see. Have a good rest of the afternoon, and if there's anything, please call us. Stay safe, friends. Bye-bye.
Bye.